This is Dr. Dan, and this is part 2 of neurotransmitter testing and the validity of that. Now, some people, of course, point out that the kidneys produce neurotransmitter breakdown products. The intestines, of course, do too, so that's not valid. But first off, let's talk about some the problems with neurotransmitter testing in general. Now, we can't observe these things directly because we can't send little microprobes into the brain to see what's going on, because we first off have to sample probably 500 different areas to find out what's going on. Now, just the stress of thinking about that is going to change your neurotransmitters. Now, we could look at what's happening in this cerebral spinal fluid, you know, the fluid surrounding the brain. But of course, going to the doctor and getting a lumbar puncture to pull some of that out, and again, just the thought of that, much less the execution of that, is going to change your neurotransmitters. So, you know, those are not valid. And now, if you're also going to look at blood, there's a problem there, in that you get this snapshot of that moment. And again, you've got somebody sticking a hole in one of your veins to pull that blood out of there. So that's going to have some make some changes as well. Now, the urine is kind of interesting because, of course, the urine is going to be filtered out of the blood. So, and the urine is going to be picking up several hours worth of the neurotransmitters. So that's going to be a lot more valid. Now, the problem that some people have with this, with the neurotransmitters, is when this was looked at by, for example, the psychiatrist, they looked at different profiles and they figured out right away that you couldn't tell by looking at a profile who was depressed, who had anxiety, who had panic attacks, who has insomnia. You couldn't figure that out by the profiles because they're kind of all over the place. But that's not really the way to look at it, because if using that kind of reasoning, you would never look at an MRI either of the low back, because if you look at 100 MRIs of low backs, you're going to realize that with the same amount of degeneration and disc problems, the symptoms are, again, all over the map. Some people are fully functional, they're out doing everything, riding motorcycles, horses, whatever, and, you know, are lifting jobs, and some people are invalids. So how do you know? You know, you can't use that kind of a standard. So it's wrong to try to use that same kind of reasoning when looking at neurotransmitters. Now, what Dr. Kellerman did, of course, when he first began to study these things, what he wanted to know is which what kind of profiles do people have who are basically healthy, and that's the proper way to go about it. Now, we've been using this kind of testing for 10 years, and I got to tell you that when I started, I was not that enthusiastic. I thought this was going to be fraught with peril, and, you know, dealing with people's depression, anxiety. You know, who wants to deal with that? So what we found, though, is that it wasn't that hard. And if you have this kind of basic information about, you know, maybe serotonin is low, again, we're looking at urine profiles, but, you know, in the urine, serotonin's low, dopamine might be high, glutamate might be high, and then you wonder, well, gee, no wonder this person's having all these issues. So when we start to get these back into a more normal range with some basic supplementation, amino acids and herbs, that neuroscience has really worked out well, people feel better and they get their life back. And so, you know, so the question of, is this really valid? And I would say yes, it is. And we've also now, one noted doctor that I've studied a lot of his stuff, and it's really excellent, but he recommends using, instead of urine testing, using questionnaires. But we found that to be completely useless in a practical experience, because people are trying to diagnose themselves then, and it just doesn't work. So it's great to have these numbers. And I think that some of the people who are really critical of Dr. Kellerman and neuroscience, sometimes I think it's just because they're in competition with them, and, you know, they don't want to find anything good about it. So anyway, is it valid? Yes, it is. It works, and if you think about it properly and approach it properly, yes, it does work, and we've seen it hundreds of times. And if it didn't work, I wouldn't be wasting my time. So that's the basics of why I believe neurotransmitter testing is valid. And there are papers about all this, you can read up, but the truth is you're going to find some for and some against. And the thing that I care about, does it make the person that I'm working with, does it help them or not? And if it does, I'm all for it. If it doesn't, then I don't care what the papers say. So that's my point of view, and thanks a lot for listening. Hopefully that was helpful.